My name is Ilse Jaffe. I was Ilse Hauptmann. That was my maiden name, and I'm 75 years old. I was born 21st of June 1933 in Schwerin an der Warthe. And as far as I remember, we lived for a time in Gotha, where my father was a teacher. And I remember the house we lived in because it had sort of a sloping roof, and under there was a lot of glass. And my sister and I used to be able to look down on the playground where the children were that my father taught. So we used to sit up there and laugh a lot, and we were told not to be too noisy because they would hear it down there. But otherwise I don't remember too much. I know a lot from my mother telling us what went on there. I had my grandparents, they lived nearby. I don't remember my grandmother at the time, but supposedly I used to sit in the back of my grandfather's car and sing all the time. I used to love to go with him and sing there. And I don't remember much about Germany because I was 5 years old. I have a sister who's a year and a half older than I am. And the time came, I don't remember how that started either, that they decided to send us away. And as far as how the community was and all that, at 5 years old you don't really care, I don't think. So what I do remember vividly, we were at the train station and ready to get on the train, and my mother was obviously crying, but at the time we said, "What's the matter? Why do you keep wiping your eyes?" And she said, "Oh, I just have a bad cold, it's all right." We kept saying, "Are you crying? Are you crying?" She said, "No, I'm not crying, I'm just, I have a bad cold and I'll see you both very soon." So we got on the train, I guess, and I don't remember that till we got to where we went to my parents' friend who's a rabbi in Malmö.
Now you went just with your sister, your father was not with you?
Yes, he came with us.
Your father came with you?
He came with us, yes. And first stop, we went by train, but first stop we went to Malmö where the rabbi's family lived. And we were there, and we of course spoke German, didn't speak any English or Swedish, of course. And from there I was sent to one family in Malmö, and my sister was sent to another family in a place called Höör. It's spelled H-O-O-E-R with the little dots over that they have. Now, the next thing I remember, we were going to go back and visit my father, and he was gone. And I guess in those days you didn't tell children, say big goodbyes or anything. So we worried about that a lot. Where did he go? What happened? And all this. And I lived with this family in Malmö for 2 years, and then they sent me to a children's home. And I worried about that a lot. I thought, well, I didn't behave or I did something that was wrong, and I was very, very quiet, very meek as a child, didn't do much of anything. And of course, like I said, nobody tells you, nobody would tell a child why.
Now during those 2 years, could you communicate with your parents?
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. We didn't do that till much later. And I heard much later that the reason I was sent away was because the mother in that house had a very bad heart, and she had heart problems. Oh. She also had 2 children, a girl quite a bit older and a son. And I liked the son very much. He was very nice and very friendly. He was a teenager at the time. So from there I went to this children's home where there were mainly orphans learning to study to go to Israel, which was Palestine at the time. And I was quite happy in the home. I was the youngest, so of course there was more fuss made of me there. And I remember that they were quite religious there too. And we had Saturday lunchtime, we just had cold whatever. And what we loved Saturday night, we used to get hot cocoa and fried potatoes. I don't know why, but everybody's very excited about that. And at the home you either ate what they had or you didn't eat. If you didn't eat at the mealtime, then you just didn't eat. You waited till the next meal. And my sister lived with a family in Höör, and they didn't have any children at the time, and of course they were very, very happy to have her there, and they treated her like their own child. And every now and then I would go and visit. It was like an hour away by train. And I remember I was very, very jealous of her because she had sort of everything. She had all the best toys, she had a new family, and I went back to the home where there were lots of children there. And I stayed. After a while, our parents wrote to us again. I guess that by then the letters could come through again. And then we were going to, the time came we were going to go to England.
Your parents were England by then?
Oh yes, my parents, they had planned for all of us to go to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent us to Sweden to wait there, and then they would get the visas and pick us up there and go to Israel. But it didn't work out, so they got as far as England. So that was that. And and shortly before we left, we were told we're going to go to England, and they started teaching us some English songs and things like that. And our mother wrote to us, remember before you leave to say thank you and behave yourself and be very good and be very grateful and all these things. Those letters we still have. And let's see. Okay, then we went by plane to Edinburgh first, from Sweden.
Had the war broken out by then, do you know?
The war hadn't finished by then.
No, but it had started.
Oh, it had started? Oh, yes.
How did your parents get to England so easily? Do you know? Did they
Well,
have friends there?
It was, no, they didn't have anybody there. I guess a certain amount of visas they let go.
Okay.
But they went with nothing. They couldn't bring anything with them, so I imagine that was probably quite difficult too. And we stayed there till 45. And at that time, they let some of the children go back to where their parents were. So some of the friends from the home, they also had on the plane. We got on the plane, we went to first Edinburgh and then to London. And I remember that very, very vividly. We were in this big room with a lot of other children, and then some people came in, and my father came in, and we recognized him because he didn't look that different. He had very little hair and he had glasses. And at the time, I guess he must have had black hair. By the time we came, he had gray hair.
Wow.
So he came into the room and they said, pick out your children, which we thought was very strange. And he did, and we went back with him. I also remember very vividly, we went up the street from where we lived. There was this lady coming down the street, and we said, who's that lady? And he said, don't you know that's your mother? Which, and
didn't recognize her?
Didn't recognize her. She looked so different. Well, she'd had long black hair, now she had short gray hair, and didn't recognize her at all. And it was very difficult. We spoke Swedish, very little German we remembered, and no English, of course. I mean, the songs would mean nothing. So it was very difficult. And I was very, very shy, and anything I wanted, I would tell my sister, and she told my parents.
Ah.
So that was...
How did your father support himself in England? What did he do?
First he worked as a waiter in one of the hotels, and later on he became a Hebrew school teacher, which he did for many, many years. And then he worked as a rabbi there too, in one of the synagogues. And let's see. Oh, after that, after a few years, we moved to a better part of the country, to Middlesex, Hendon, and we had a very nice house there. And we went to school, and of course we didn't know any English, but that's the only way we learned it, which doesn't take very long. But I remember they were very, very strict. If you did something wrong, they put out your hand and they would hit you with a ruler. But being the mouse that I was never hit for that. And we learned English because you have no choice as such. And what we did quite often, our parents sent us to a church that was downtown London, where there was a Swedish society. So, we were able to have a little contact with Swedish people, which we enjoyed quite a bit. And then we moved on to Hendon, where my sister was still very, what she called homesick. She missed the people in Sweden. In fact, they wrote they would like to adopt her. They wanted her to come back and adopt her. And of course, my parents wouldn't do that. And several times she ran away. She didn't want to stay. She wanted to go back to Sweden. So she was very defiant, which was very difficult for my mother too, of course. And after a while, when our English got better, we went to a better school. And at one point, we used to go by train to the school. And let's see. No, that was a different school. The first school we went by bus, and we could have walked. My mother said we were supposed to walk to school, which of course half the time we didn't. Our father gave us money, so we took the bus. And one time we decided we're going to go on the bus, we don't want to walk there. And that time there was an air raid, and where we would have walked there was a big bombing. And my parents were very upset. Of course, they ran out to see what's happening and what's going on. And after that, my mother said, you can take the bus anytime you want. So that was different too. The school we went to, they wore uniform, which was nice, which we liked because they thought we had sort of foreign-looking clothes, like any other children. Everybody wants to look the same. So that was a big help with the uniform. And
Do you remember during this time whether your parents had any contact with relatives back in Germany?
they didn't, because my grandfather died in Germany, not because of Hitler or anything. And my grandmother and my aunt and uncle had gone to Bolivia. Instead of coming to America, first they went to Bolivia. And I have an uncle, that's my mother's brother, he went to the States. He came to America right away. And my father had family and they were all killed. He was the only one left. So those are people I never knew. And after a while, my uncle sponsored my aunt and grandmother, and they came to New York. And they lived in Washington Heights. And in London we went to school, and my sister trained as a secretary, and I trained as a nursery school teacher, because I've always loved little children. And I've done that all my life till I retired, which I enjoyed a lot. And let's see what else.
When did you decide to leave England for America?
Well, that's also interesting. I was applying for a job. I was planning to go to Italy as a nursery nurse, as you know, with a private family. In fact, I'd rented a place where I could learn to speak Italian somewhat. And before I heard about that job, my aunt wrote to say that my grandmother had fallen down, broken her hip, and if I could come and take care of her. So I went over to the States, had a wonderful time on the boat.
You had no trouble getting into the States?
No.
What year was this? Was this after the war?
Oh, this was a long time after the war, yeah.
How old were you then?
I was, I must have been about 20, I think.
Oh, okay.
So it's quite a while ago. I came over to England when I was 10, so that's quite a while ago. So I came to the States and took care of her. She had to go to rehab and all this kind of thing, so we took a taxi. She didn't speak any English, so it was very difficult for her. So I came, she was living with my aunt and uncle, and I used to take her every day by bus or train or whatever, and I didn't know anybody, of course, any young people. So my aunt knew his aunt, and they said, oh, you know, why don't get
your husband's aunt?
My husband's aunt knew my aunt, so they decided, since I don't know anybody, maybe we should get together. So Warner came from the farm down to visit, and what I remember very well, when he was there, my grandmother always asked lots of very personal questions, and I was very embarrassed, but he was very calm about it, answered everything very politely, very calmly. So I figured that's very nice. And then I was invited up to the farm. I stayed there for a week, where my in-laws also lived. And we had a very good time, and we had a lot in common. And we knew each other not that long. We got engaged. And then I had to go back because the visa was done. I had to go back to get a permanent visa. So I went back to England. And you know, every now and then I thought, well, I don't know him enough, and maybe it's not a good idea. And my mother was all for me staying in England, of course. And every time I thought, well, maybe not, I got a letter from him. It seemed to work every time. I was kind of two ways. It's a long way away and all this, and he wrote to me. So that was very, very nice. And while I was in New York, of course, I lived with my aunt and uncle. And my uncle died a long time ago, but my aunt died about 3 years ago, and she was 99. Yeah, she lived in a home, and we used to visit her at least once a month down in New Jersey. So that was wonderful. She was a very, very good person, very nice, gentle person. And my mother also had Parkinson's, and she died must be about 18, 19 years, maybe 20 years ago by now. And after my father died, he still died in England. After my father died, my mother moved to Gloversville, which is the next town over from ours. And she bought a little house there. She wanted to be independent, but still near the family. So what we did is every weekend, I worked in Gloversville too, so every weekend when I was done, I would come and pick her up, and she'd spend the weekend with us. And then Sunday evening, we'd take her back again to her house. So that worked very well. And Warner's parents lived in the house, and we got along very well too. It was nice. My father-in-law used to say, "You're not my daughter-in-law, you're my daughter." So that's how we felt about each other. It was very
What
nice.
year did you get married?
We got married in 57.
57.
Yeah. So that's a while ago too.
Yeah.
And we have 4 children, which they were all a blessing, every one of them. We enjoy. So we have Danny here, of course, and then we have a daughter in Waltham, that's Miriam. And we have a son in Rhode Island, that's Jonathan. And then we have another son in Maryland, that's Joey. So that's all 4 of them.
Right, now, when you finished your education in England, you got a degree in education?
Yes, it was called the Nursery Nurses School of Education. And I worked here for many, many years too, which I enjoyed. First I worked in a private nursery, and then I worked at the Jewish Community Center in Gloversville. I was there for a long time. I enjoyed that very much. And then after I retired, I was over at the school. We have a school right across the street from us, and I volunteered over there with the lower grades. And the kids always used to kid me, our children, that I never got out of nursery school. I got as high as kindergarten, and that was it.
Now, did your father and mother ever talk to you about why they realized so quickly how important it was to get you and your sister out of Germany and themselves out of Germany? Because lots of people have said that Hitler was a passing phenomenon, it would all go away, there's no point in leaving.
Yeah.
But your parents knew it was important to leave. Did they ever talk to you about that?
Well, all this we heard later. My father apparently had friends higher up in the German group, and they more or less told him it's time to get out. And my father told other people, and said, "No, we've got a beautiful house here, lovely living. We're not going. It's like you said, it's just a passing thing." And my parents had very good friends who had little girls same age as us. And my parents said, maybe this is a good time to send her out. And they said, "No, we would never do that. We would never let our children go away from us." And what happened? She died. So that was very dramatic at the time too.
So you're one of the very, very lucky ones. I'm sure you know that.
Absolutely.
The entire family.
Yeah.
Do you ever think back on what your life might have been like if you hadn't left, or that's behind you? You don't think about
Yeah,
that?
I do sometimes. But what I thought about mainly when our children were 5 years old, so 6 years old, I thought, would I ever be able to send them away to you don't know where? And it's a question you can't answer. If the time is there, then maybe you know, but otherwise, I just couldn't imagine it.
Do you think your mother agreed with the decision, or your father talked her into it, or?
It would be more my mother agreed and my father was talked into it,
Ah,
I think.
okay.
But I'm sure it must have been a terrible decision for them to do that. But the one advantage they had or we had was that at least there were people there that knew us, that knew my parents. That the rabbi could kind of keep an eye on where we were and what was going on, which was a big help too, I'm sure, to my parents.
And at home, when you were a little girl, did anyone speak Yiddish, or you just spoke German at
Just
home?
German.
Just German.
My parents, neither one of them spoke Yiddish.
Your father was observant, I assume?
Yes, very observant. What I remember well from when we came Friday, he always cleaned everybody's shoes.
Ah.
I think of that now when I clean my shoes too, that he always, it's one of those things you remember. And I remember that I was older by then. I was working in one nursery in England, and I wanted to get a bike in the worst ways. I wanted a bicycle. We couldn't really afford it. My mother had gone to America to visit her sister, my aunt. So my father was more of a softie. So I nagged him and nagged him and nagged him until he signed, and I got the bike. He said, "Oh, when your mother comes back, she'll be angry if I do this." I said, "No, she won't. She'll be all right." Of course, she came back and she was angry, but I had my bike. So he was a very gentle man.
Have you ever felt an impulse to go back to Schwerin?
Never.
Never.
Never, ever, no.
And you never have?
No, never have. Anywhere in Germany, I had no intention, no impulse.
Right. And your children haven't tried to go back to see
No.
where you were born? No.
I don't think they were ever interested either.
Yeah.
And even people speaking German very loudly bothers me too, even to this day.
Did your parents ever go back to Germany?
No, they never
No.
went back, neither one of them either. Never, I don't think, my aunt never went back, my uncle never went back. I don't think they were interested in that.
And did your sister stay in contact with the family?
Yes, actually she did. She's still in contact. Of course, the parents have died, but after she was there for about 5 years, they had a child of their own. And they kept saying, you know, it's a blessing you were here, because like this we have a baby. And you know, she and her little sister, she always called her little sister, they got along extremely well. And she's still in touch with them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she and her husband went back a few times to Sweden, not to Germany, and got in touch with them. And even now she still writes to her sister, who got married and has 3 children, and still keep in touch, which I think is wonderful. Well, I didn't stay in touch with anybody.
Yeah. But you had a different experience.
Yeah.
With her. Yeah. And when you finally were reunited with your parents, did you gradually develop close family relationships, or was there some tension as a result of your... A lot of children say that they resent the fact that their parents sent them away. Did you ever have that feeling?
I didn't, but my sister did, because she, of course, had quite a different life over there.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. But it took a long time to really... First, it was like living with strangers. You know, like I said, I was afraid to ask for anything, so my sister did, and it took quite a while till we got close. And we went to school in England, and my mother taught us German at home. So that kind of helped to bond a little bit too.
Do you still remember German? You speak German?
Yeah, I still speak German. We don't speak German that much because my parents are gone and Warner's parents are gone, so it's only between us, and we don't speak very often.
At home you never spoke German, you and Warner, to each other?
Only really when our parents were around. I mean, they all spoke English, but they were more comfortable with German, so we speak German. Or when we didn't want the children to understand something.
Yes,
we would.
that's what everyone says.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And my mother used to take us to the operas and concerts and all those kind of things, which was nice.
In London?
In London,
Yeah.
yes. Because in Sweden, where I lived in the home that was way out in the country, and in the summer or school time we would ride bicycles there, and in the winter we would ski there, which was strange because very often these sleds would go by and we would hook onto the back and sort of get a free ride on the skis. So that was nice.
Well, for me it's a total pleasure to interview someone who did not have a terribly traumatic experience
Right.
of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
You're rare and almost unique in that respect.
I was lucky, sure.
And you were very lucky. Anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
No?
I think that's
All
about
right,
it.
all right. Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you.